Hey everyone, thanks for being with us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes with Chad Foster. So just go ahead and hold on. We will get started right around 12 o'clock. All right, once again, thank you everybody for being here today. We are very excited to be joined by Chad Foster, UT alum of the year 2000. We are going to talk today about blind ambition, how to go from victim to visionary. We are going to go over a couple of ground rules first, just to discuss these with everyone. You'll notice that your mic has been muted, and that will be the case for the duration of the webinar today, as well as your camera being off. But we do ask you to engage with us through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar. And if you have questions throughout the chat, I talked to Chad before we got started, and he is totally cool with answering those as we go along. So as we have topics to discuss, feel free to throw those in at any time, and Chad and I will stop and make sure that those get answered. So it is my pleasure to introduce everybody to Chad. Chad's a motivational keynote speaker, sales finance leader, and inspirational change agent who works at Red Hat IBM. He was the first blind executive to graduate from Harvard Business School's program for leadership development and has been featured with NBC, Forbes, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, USA Today, Thrive Global, and Chief Executive Magazine. After losing his eyesight while attending the University of Tennessee in his early 20s, Chad started at Accenture and has built a career in the technology industry where he has directed financial strategies and decisions resulting in more than $45 billion in contracts. Determination, ambition, and resilience are the key drivers to his incredible journey. And today, Chad is going to speak to corporate audiences and professional athletes to help them develop resilience in the face of uncertainty, to better understand how to harness diversity for innovation and show people how to overcome their own blind spots. He lives with his wife and his two kids in Atlanta, Georgia. And so that was a mouthful, Chad, but that is a full introduction. But if there's anything you would like to add, please feel free to do that, and we will get started with some questions here in a second.
No, that was great. Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that nice introduction. You're right. It definitely was a mouthful, but you definitely covered a lot of ground there. And I appreciate the great introduction and look forward to the conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we're going to jump into some questions for Chad. And then, like I said, if at any point during the conversation, any of our attendees have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A at the bottom. But I want to start, Chad, by talking about that in the beginning of your book, Blind Ambition, you talk about your final sunset. Can you provide us with an overview of your journey and kind of give us some background there?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 3 years old, my parents noticed that I had difficulty seeing in really dimly lit areas. So they took me to Duke University, where the doctors there diagnosed me with RP, or retinitis pigmentosa, which is an inherited retinal condition. Now, because it's autosomal recessive, neither of my parents were symptomatic. They were both obviously carriers of the gene, and they donated a bad copy from each of them to me. So it's autosomal recessive, meaning I've got two bad copies of that one gene. It turns out I have the LRAT gene that's mutated. But the doctors told my parents that they should put me in a special school for the blind, but instead they signed me up for soccer. Now, growing up, I was really active. I played sports like football, basketball, soccer, and wrestling, and drove a car when I got older and rode jet skis and bicycles and things like that. So I was an extremely active kid. And I didn't really see myself as a blind or visually impaired person. My self-image never acknowledged the fact that I had a disability or a pending disability. But I had to learn the limitations of my eyesight the hard way. And the one way to find something that you don't see is to bounce off of it. And so I did a lot of that, because none of us, whether it's literal or figurative, don't know what we cannot see when we cannot see it. So bumps and bruises became a way of life for me. Now, this started off as very physical, but it was also emotional, right? The bumps and bruises of going through that adversity and learning that, you know what, I couldn't see as well as everyone else. I couldn't play certain games at night that I wanted to play, whether it be football under the night lights in school or indoors at a basketball arena. It was hard for me to use those artificial lights with my eye condition. But these experiences hardened me both physically and mentally. And my parents gave me a good amount of tough love as well. They expected maybe a little bit more from me than they did my brother because he didn't have the same condition. And they knew that I would have a really difficult road based on my condition. Life would be just a little bit harder for me. And it turns out they were right, because over time, my symptoms gradually worsened. And when I finally lost all of my eyesight in college at the University of Tennessee, my imagined future self died. And it was an incredibly painful time. I was in shock and I was in denial. I was angry and I was sad. And it was a really challenging time for me.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that you touched on something really valuable there, which is we don't really know that adversity is facing us until we face it, right? Until it rears up, we don't always know that we're in that battle. And it sounds like you responded to that adversity with some resiliency. And so just to kind of piggyback off of that a little bit, can you talk to us a little bit more about what that process of self-acceptance looked like, whether that be emotionally or mentally, what that journey kind of looked like for you when you were at Tennessee and that change in your life happened?
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? When you're in the moment, you don't really know how you make it through. And yeah, you can find this. I find this today, even when I'm going through something. But now, obviously, being 20 years removed from the situation, it's a lot clearer to me as to what the process actually was and how I ended up getting from point A to point B. And, at first, realistically, I was in denial. I refused to accept what my eyes were telling me, that the world of eyesight was fading away from me. You see, when I was younger, I saw myself as a hard charging young man ready to make a difference in the medical field. But after I went blind, I wasn't even sure if I could help myself. And it's not easy to be hard charging when you're unable to walk around without the assistance from someone else. So I felt afraid, ashamed, and even embarrassed about my situation. All of the implications of weakness and dependency, things that I feared. And as I woke up to this new dark reality marked by disability and low expectations, I was angry. I was bitter. But I've learned that it's really important to see ourselves stripped of delusion, self-deception, and unnecessary pride. It can be painful, but we have to see ourselves for who we are, which is the foundation for self-acceptance. Not accepting ourselves takes us down the path of defeat, depression, and victimhood. Now, for years, I've been ignoring what my eyes had been telling me, that I was on borrowed time. But I did actually have a tipping point moment while attending the University of Tennessee. And it's when I enrolled at Leader Dogs for the Blind to get a guide dog. And I went there to get a guide dog in Rochester Hills, Michigan, but I ended up learning a far more valuable lesson. You see, there were people there, some of them had mental impairments and they were blind. Some of them were on dialysis because the diabetes that robbed them of their eyesight was destroying their kidneys. And there were these young girls there who were deaf and blind. And they, like all of us, were there to get a service dog to be independent. Now, for these girls, we had to talk with an interpreter who would sign into their hands, and that was the only way that they could communicate, yet they were getting a guide dog to travel independently. Now, the living courage exhibited by all these people taught me lessons of gratitude that I could have never learned any other way. Living with them for 26 days deeply reshaped my perspective on life forever. So that's when I decided that, life is like a game of cards. No one controls their hand, but we all control how we play them. And using a guide dog, turns out, shined a light on the very thing I'd been trying to deny and hide for years. Parading around with a 115-pound German Shepherd makes it impossible to hide the fact that I have a problem. It made it impossible to hide my imperfection. I had an eyesight problem. And at this time, it's when I learned that it's okay to admit and even embrace your imperfections. We all have imperfections. None of us are perfect. So my first guide dog forced me to embrace the very thing that I'd been trying to hide. It forced me to love me at first, despite my imperfections, but eventually because of them. So if you think about it, we ask kids all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? And none of them, and I mean none of them, said they want to grow up and be a blind person. But to succeed with change, whatever it is, we have to be able to visualize success in it. I had to figure out how I could make blind look good to me. And once we start visualizing greatness in our circumstances, whatever that is, it moves us towards acceptance. And so when I first went blind, I kept asking, why me? And at first, I was asking this question with a really bitter tone because I was bitter. I was angry. Why me? Why did this happen to me? And I had the tone of a victim. But over time, I learned to ask the very same question, but with a different tone, a curious tone. Why did this happen to me? And eventually that answer started to emerge. I started to find out why this did happen to me.
And Chad, you touched on something in there too, that a word that I think is really powerful, and that was the word of courage. And I think that when we think about vulnerability, often I think when we're children, I'll speak to myself here, like you're taught that vulnerability and courage are not synonymous with one another. But it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. And so can you just talk about, what was your process of becoming self-aware of your blind spots, and talk about how you kind of had to pull that vulnerability out of yourself and really talk about the courage that it took to do that?
Yeah, it was definitely a process, Jordan. I was blind to my encroaching blindness, as ironic as that sounds. But I think we all have blind spots and disabilities, figuratively and literally. Our mental and our emotional blind spots function in the same way. You see, my blind spot, my blindness forced me to admit my weaknesses and rely on other people. For example, back then at University of Tennessee in 1998, 1999, not all books were digital. So my mom literally read every single business book to audio tape. And because I was a visual learner, I had to relearn how to learn. And so I developed a new learning system. And it turns out I was a better blind student than sighted student. I ended up reading each of those recorded books twice and listening to each of the lectures twice, and then going over notes with the note taker that the University of Tennessee provided. And I ended up making straight A's and made the dean's list because I didn't want to, I couldn't memorize information. I had to digest it, right? With this new learning technique that I had to develop it was really consuming the information as opposed to just kind of memorizing enough to get by, because I had a really good visual memory before when I could see, which was obviously not very useful after I went blind. And I also didn't want to let my parents down because they had sacrificed so much for me. And interestingly, I accepted a job after college. Coming out of college, I accepted one with Anderson Consulting in Atlanta. When I started to think about that, the new city and learning the new transportation system, the public transit, and then traveling all over the country, the job required 75% travel. Learning how to do this new, very technical job. I was not a technology person. I was a business and finance person. Even something as simple that we all take for granted is getting our groceries. Doing all this with my eyes closed. And bear in mind, this is in 98. There are no smartphones, or this is actually technically 2000 now, moving 2001. But there are no smartphones. There's no Uber. There's no Uber Eats. There's no Instacart. That stuff didn't exist. And I was thinking about how to accomplish all this without being able to see. The fact that I'd just gone blind a year and a half earlier, the more I thought about it, the scarier it became. I was frankly terrified. People would ask me, are you excited? Yeah, of course I'm excited. What I had hid from them and maybe even myself is that I was absolutely terrified. But we all have fears in our lives, right? And truthfully, everybody's facing fears, but courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing something despite the presence of fear. And there are fears, and then there are also counter fears. The fear of failing at something versus the fear of not reaching our full potential. Which fear do we allow to dominate our decision making? I decided at the time that I could live with failing in pursuit of my goals, but I could not live with not reaching my full potential.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that, that journey looked probably a lot different at different points in your life. I mean, going back at one point, like what we think will be our future, what we think will define our success adjust as we grow and adjust and as our life adjusts. And you talked about, some of those challenges of acceptance of different parts of yourself as you did see changes in your life, but whether that be prior to Tennessee or at Tennessee and things of that nature. What would you say is, the part of yourself that you struggled to deny or repress?
Well, for years, I struggled to admit that I was losing my eyesight, and I just kind of ignored it. I thought maybe if I just kind of wish it away, it'll go away. And then I started self-medicating my thoughts, my negative thoughts as my eyesight began to decline. I ruminated about my blindness, even though I couldn't control it. And it wasn't my fault, wasn't anybody's fault. It was just one of those things that happens. Stuff happens. And so what are you going to do? But it occurred to me at University of Tennessee, I was 20 something years old. I realized that I couldn't live the next 50 plus years like that, right? It would be a pretty miserable existence. Just churning in the negativity and toxicity was consuming me. And it wasn't changing my blindness, but it was making me miserable. I didn't really want to be blind, but blind and miserable? Yeah, no thanks. So I decided to focus on the things that I could control, which was the way that I looked at the situation, my perspective, my focus, my effort, and my determination.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quote that I actually say a lot at different points is from a fellow UT person herself. Pat Summitt used to always say, "Control what you can control." And I think that as somebody who struggles with that at times, I write it down all the time on my notebook or at different places, just because it's very important to me to remember that at all times. And Chad, it looks like I think we may have lost your camera there for a second. Can you let me see here. Sorry, everybody. See if Chad gets back on real quick. Yeah, I see that his connection dropped out. If everybody doesn't mind to just wait, just Chad can get back on here. Everyone, again, just one moment here as I'm going to try to get Chad back on. I will be back in just a moment. If we are unable to reconnect, I will be sure to let everybody know, but thank you again for your patience while we work to solve those technical issues. There we go.
Well, that was interesting.
Hey, that's okay. It's the technical world right now we live in.
My computer just literally rebooted.
Oh. Well, I'm glad we were able to get you back on. It looks like we've still got people here with us for the talk. So I think we can hopefully just pick up where we left off if you're good with that.
I am. Yeah, if you can, let me just, I'm literally just logging in. Things are still kind of loading.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I just went from having a conversation to everything just went black and started rebooting. That's Windows for you, right? I guess.
Hey.
Good thing we're talking about resilience, right?
Absolutely. We're putting it into practice in real time. So no, and I think what we were turning to was I was talking about like the control what you can control, and we were talking about that factor, and this is a prime example of that, right?
Ironic.
But yeah, the irony is uncanny in this. But I want to talk. I kind of want to shift that conversation a little bit because you talked about how throughout these different periods of your life and looking at different things from different perspectives that maybe your sense of purpose changed at different points as well. Can you talk about what would you say gives you a sense of purpose and willingness to live by those core values that you hold true to yourself? And I'm sure, like I said, that those maybe have adjusted throughout time.
Definitely. And it turns out that this really is a great time to go blind. And it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's also true. Mindset is everything. I control the way I see the world, and so does everyone else here. We can all adjust our perspectives because the facts are far less relevant than the stories that we tell ourselves. Now, I could tell myself that I went blind because I have terrible luck. Or I could tell myself that I went blind because I'm one of the very few people on the planet with the strength and the toughness to overcome it and help other people. Technically, both of those stories can be correct. Which story do people think I should live by? One story frames me up to be a victim. The other story reframes my struggle into a strength. My blindness happened to me because I'm strong enough to overcome it, which enables me to take on all of life's challenges. You see, we have to learn to take advantage of our disadvantages. And that all starts with mindset. We all become the stories that we tell ourselves. I refuse to let my lack of eyesight limit my vision. Now, another crucial element here is effort. Along with perception, it's one of the key things that we can control. None of us control all of our circumstances, but we can control how we show up and how hard we work. Now, growing up, we had a lot more work than a bunch of our friends. But when I needed to learn how to write code without being able to see my computer screen, just to be able to do my job, it didn't stop me. Nobody is responsible for all of their circumstances, but we all have to be accountable for our life and its outcomes. It's my life. I have to own it. It's your life. You have to own it. If you don't, who will? Now, we can all find legitimate reasons to fail, but how do they serve us? They don't. Legitimate reasons to fail may comfort us in the moment, but they don't carry us towards our goals, which is why I've adopted the philosophy that excuses are for losers. Now, my purpose at first was very focused on helping to pave a way, showing the art of the possible for people with disabilities. And now, obviously, it's shifted to try and help people think differently about developing resilience, nurturing the right mindset to adapt and thrive in various circumstances. And so purpose to me is really important because it drives a lot of our motivation, our decision making. And once we can link our purpose to our passion, in our profession, that to me is where that critical intersection is, where we can start living a more inspired life in pursuit of our dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing all those sentiments, and it transitions really well to the next question that we have, which is, your life has shifted into this role of being a public speaker and a leader in a lot of capacities. And can you just talk about what your intrinsic and extrinsic motivations are to be a leader amidst all the change that we've experienced in the world? That you and I were chatting before we talked with the whole group about how that's changed our careers, it's changed our lives, and I'm sure that's changed what leadership has looked like at different times. So can you just talk about what is internally motivating to you as well as extrinsically motivating to you?
Well, I think, intrinsically, I am now motivated. Like I want to help people, individuals become the best version of themselves. And so helping people nurture resilience. I've learned a lot through my journey. Obviously, I had, went through some pretty difficult lessons, but there's an opportunity to help people think differently about change, about circumstances they can't control, about how to live happier, more productive, and more successful lives. And I think now that's probably needed more than ever. And it is why I wrote Blind Ambition. It is why I started giving motivational presentations all over the world. It's why I teach resilience workshops for leadership teams. It's a big part of what I think my reason for being on the planet is. And first, like I said, it was, I wanted to have a successful business career, and that required that I influence things that were inside my sphere of influence. I had to relearn how to learn. Outside my sphere of influence were the things that, like my blindness, and what meaning did I attach to those things influenced how I thought about them, and whether or not I could paint enough of a bold vision. Was my vision for myself bold enough to get me where I needed to be? And so when I talk about making blind look good, that's a big part of it. It's looking at what's outside your sphere of influence and understanding what can you do to make that look great, and then start examining the things inside your sphere of influence and say, all right, I can control. I need to get a degree. I need to get a job. I need to, make good grades. I need to relearn how to learn. I need to figure out how am I going to succeed in the business world. All right, maybe I need to, have certain successes to achieve promotions. And then all of a sudden, once you start expanding yourself and growing, you start to realize there's more opportunity. And now that's evolved with, writing the book and giving a keynote and teaching others. But I think it really starts with looking at your circumstances and examining very honestly, what can you control, what can you not control, what meaning do you attach to the things that you can't control, and how do you create the right plan, the right actions and habits, and the right mindset of holding yourself accountable to move forward despite circumstances. We've all had a really difficult year with COVID, and it's been a really challenging year. And for some people, some people have had it worse than others. There's been a lot of medical disruption. There's been social disruption. There's been economic disruption. Some people have had all the above. And so we have to, at some point, we have to find the silver linings, even with all of the terrible things that have happened. I don't want to try and negate the fact that it's been really difficult for a lot of people. It has been, but those aren't going to change whether or not we find silver linings, right? Those negative things have happened, and they're, it's unchangeable. But we do at some point need to try and examine what good can we get out of this bad situation. And for me personally, it's, I didn't have to travel 90% of the time last year, and I could spend more time with my family and my children, and we could connect in a way that we couldn't otherwise. I wasn't in airports or hotels nearly as much. And so it's those little tidbits of things that we can find if we look hard enough, and if we step back and, step away from all of the activity long enough, then we can find those silver linings that, it doesn't make it great. It doesn't mean that the year of COVID was a phenomenal year, but it does mean that there are some things that we can learn and benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think finding the bright side of any situation, obviously, is hopeful and being optimistic. Um, And you talked a little bit about this through that sentiment you just shared, but what would you say is your life vision, and what inspires you to achieve the personal goals that you've set out for yourself?
Well, we're all directors in the film of our lives. What ending do we want for our lives? We all become the stories that we tell ourselves. If we tell ourselves that we're victims, then that's who we're going to be. If we tell ourselves that we've got this and we're going to own it and make it look good, then that's who we're going to be. So, what is everyone's story? Is my question. What ending will each of us write for our lives? What ending will you write for your life? Complacency is the enemy of progress. Life rewards action. And I believe that life begins outside of our comfort zone. I want to be my best self to make a difference in the world. And my hope is that we're all striving for that. I'm convinced that I lost my vision to help other people find theirs. It's why I wrote Blind Ambition. It's why I give motivational talks. It's why I teach resilience. But we all have to identify what greatness is for us. What does great look like for us? And then, believe it and demand it and pursue it regardless of circumstances.
Yeah, so true, and I appreciate you sharing that. After you lost your eyesight, you developed an enriched experience of your other senses. Can you talk about that process of losing your eyesight and how that enhanced those other areas? And could you elaborate on some of those for us about what was enhanced when you did lose your eyesight?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, most information that people consume is visual. And so, without all that visual information coming to my brain, I've freed up the ability to focus on the other senses. So, yeah, I'm better able to detect, sounds, smells, textures, things like that. And there's no doubt that I'm more contemplative than before I went blind. All the visual information that floods most people's brains doesn't really tie up my attention. So I have time to focus my attention and be more reflective and be less reactive to a situation. And I think I also see people more deeply than I did before. For example, when I met my wife, I wasn't looking at her hair or what clothes she was wearing. I was looking at the fact she was bold, she was courageous, energetic, and smart. And when my daughter asked me if I can see her, I assure her that I'm watching her with my heart. So I'm focused on not so much the way people look, but how they appear on the inside, who they are on the inside. So in many regards, my lack of eyesight has given me better vision because I'm not distracted by what my eyes tell me. And the best way to improve your vision is to stop looking all around you and start looking inside you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just like a really awesome sentiment that you shared, and the way that you can see without your eyes, is something I think we can all take to heart. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Um, it sounds like, and through your book and through our conversation today, it sounds like you've overcome a lot of different fears in your life. Can you talk about what your process is for overcoming fear, and how do you view fear now, and how's that view of fear adjusted?
Yeah, fear dominates most of our decision making, right? It's it's one of those things that whether we think about it or not, subconsciously it creeps into most of our decision making. Now, I've lived most of my life outside of my comfort zone. It's been a bit of an experiment of living outside my comfort zone. Growing up, I was fearful of how people would react. I was very uncomfortable when I was walking around and playing sports and learning the limitations of my eyesight. It was very uncomfortable. After I went blind, obviously, it was uncomfortable getting a guide dog and then going into university classes. There were not a lot of German Shepherds in university classes. So the first few times that was really uncomfortable. And then going into job interviews and conference rooms and then traveling domestically and then internationally, going to a foreign country where I don't speak the language, can't see the signage, but yet getting up at 5 a.m. for my workout where I'm making my way to the gym with a guide dog and can't identify the equipment to get my workout in. All of those things were uncomfortable at first, but over time I noticed that my comfort zone continued to expand. And as I inched outside my comfort zone and faced each fear, I noticed my confidence building to take on more and more. And now, since going blind, I learned how to ski. I ski black and even double black diamond slopes now without having learned how to ski before I could see. And I think in many regards, it gives me an advantage. I was skiing a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, and we're on a double black in Aspen. And he said, just be thankful you can't see around us because it's absolutely terrifying. So in many regards, it gives me a bit of an advantage because, I'm not looking at all the things that really could go wrong. I'm focused on the task at hand. I'm focused on the next turn, the left turn, the right turn. But I think a lot of people, have these fears, the fear of failure, the fear of losing power, the fear of losing influence, fear of economic losses. All of these are fears that a lot of leaders face. And if you look at the loss aversion theory, right, it teaches us that the fear of loss is twice as powerful as its equal possible gain. So we would all much rather not lose $10 as to win $10. So we would need to win $20 in order to risk losing $10. So this loss aversion and a bias towards conformity explains why. This is Harvard Business Review did a study back in 2016 of the 30 companies that made up the Dow Jones in 1991. 50% of them are gone, extinct. And that was of 2016. So the cost of an action is extinction. And there's this huge invisible barrier to change and progress. And it's largely the fear of starting over. Nobody wants to go from being an expert to entry level. So what do? How do we manage through the fear? So I like to talk a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit here about people who knew a whole lot about managing through fear, and that's the Japanese samurai warriors. So it's really hard to think of someone who faced more fear than samurai warriors. So they emerged in the 1100s during the feudal era, and this was a brutally violent time in Japan. Now, these professional warriors were also masters of mindset. They managed to stay calm and focused, even in battle. So how did they do it? Every day when they woke up and before they went into battle, you know what they thought about? They thought about death. They thought about what it was like to be dead. Imagining the worst possible outcome for themselves made it less scary. So they fought lighter and with nothing to lose. They'd already accepted that possible outcome. So they're able to transcend fear and perform in the most extreme conditions. How do many of us play the game of life? How do we play the game of life? Most of us play to not lose instead of playing to win. So the question I'd have for people on the call here is, how are you playing the game of life? Are you playing it to not lose, or are you playing it to win? A dear friend of mine, my mentor and leader, passed this last year. He was 53 years old. He had stage 4 brain cancer, left behind 3 children and his wife, whom he had been married to for 25 years. I worked for him for almost a decade, and he taught me a lot about leadership. He taught me a lot about life. He taught me a lot about how to take care of people, about business as well. But I think his final gift to me was the reminder that none of us are here forever. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. Whatever we want to do in this life, we have a limited amount of time to do it. He had 53 years. None of us know how much time we're going to get. Why not take the chance on what you really want out of this life now? Not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, now. What do you have to lose?
Yeah, that's so true, and something I think we can all take to heart. And a question actually came through in the Q&A while you were talking about that, Chad, and I think it goes really well here, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it to you. you were talking about fear, and one of the questions that we have here is, did you ever fear that you would be defined by your blindness? Did you think that that was ever going to be something that defined you when there are so many other qualities to you as a person?
I think maybe in the back of my mind, that was something that was there. I don't think I really ever consciously thought of that, but I've met so many people, they'll come up to me and ask me, "Hey, who feeds your dog for you?" Or, "Oh, you have a job." Like all the biases that you can possibly imagine, I've faced. I faced, a breathtaking amount of ignorance and assumptions and things. But because I've lived over 20 years of my life as a privileged white majority and another 20 plus years as a disabled minority, I've seen like multiple vantage points. And so when I could see, I had some of the very natural questions that I hear from a lot of people. So I can kind of understand where people are coming from with some of those questions. But I don't think, I really sat down and thought about it like that. Certainly my circumstances, maybe didn't define me, but certainly could have limited the way that I thought about my potential. And I think we're all guilty of that. Okay, for me, it's blindness. For somebody else, it's something else. We all have self limiting beliefs. And the thing that I chose is to not let anyone's opinion influence what I thought I was capable of. Because if I had, I would probably be at home reading books on tape in my parents' basement. And all of us, whether it's our parents or our friends or well-meaning or well-intended society, we constantly run into limiting beliefs. And so I would just encourage each of you to examine your own lives and think about, what self-limiting beliefs do I have? What dreams do I have? And am I thinking big enough? And to what extent are my friends either enabling me to get to those goals or maybe preventing? Because I found for my life that we are the average of the 5 people we hang out with. So are your friends bringing you up or bringing you down?
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you answering that and sharing some insight there. The last question that we have for you right now, if of course, if anybody has any extra ones, please put those in the Q&A as Chad kind of wraps it up with this last question, which is, we've talked about it. It has been on the forefront of everybody's mind throughout the past year, and you're in some change now. But it's been a tough year. You talked about that earlier. Can you talk about how people can build that resilient mindset that you've touched on multiple times today? But can you talk about that a little bit more explicitly, like how we can build that resilient mindset against adversity and anything that we may face?
Yeah, let me tell a story here. I think that illustrates the point pretty well. It's a story about a king, a ruthless king. Now, this particular king imprisoned a lot of innocent people. And there was this one particular man, and he was innocent, but he was imprisoned for several years, and he was missing his freedom. And so one day, his family, who were missing him as well, they smuggled in a picture of them, a picture of his family, in this elegant metal frame. And he loved that picture frame. It was a source of calmness to him. Its beauty and its meaning soothed him greatly. So when he was having a bad day, he would pull out that metal framed picture and it gave him peace. Well, one day, this particular inmate received a companion in his jail cell. And so this new inmate joins in his jail cell. And the new inmate asked him a question. He said, "Do you know what that is?" As he motioned towards the picture frame. The prisoner said, "Yeah, of course. This is a picture of my family." And the second prisoner said, "Well, maybe, but it's also something we can use to pick the lock." And that night, the 2 prisoners used that metal frame picture to pick the lock and escape their prison. They walked out that night free forever. Today, our prisons are our circumstances. And the key to set us free is right in front of us, just like that metal frame. All the prisoner had to do was step back and look at the situation, in this case, the metal frame, with fresh eyes. You just had to look at it differently. Our perspectives in life can hold us back or set us free. A victim will stay trapped and not have the right mindset to move forward, but a visionary will bounce back and find a way to set themselves free. So in our lives, we have things that we control and things that we don't. And in order to thrive, we have to visualize things that are outside of our control and how we can make them acceptable to us, how we can make them look good. For me, it was making blind look good. How do we make the hard facts in our lives look good? Reimagining greatness for ourselves, including these unchangeable facts, can set us free. And it moves us towards acceptance. That to me is the true vision of resilience, or the true meaning of resilience. And then once you have that, once you've learned how to reframe your situation in medical science, cognitive psychology, it's called cognitive reframing. But it's looking at what meaning we attach to events. The meaning of events, the meaning we attach to events are far more important than the facts alone. So if we can take a given situation and derive meaning out of it, meaning that propels us forward instead of holds us back, that's where resilience lies. And then once we have a resilient mindset, then we can start creating actions, habits, and accountability to move us towards our vision and our goals.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap us up, and just talking through everything that we've talked about today. And I just want to again say thank you very much for giving up your time to speak with our alumni and friends of the university, and talking about that resilience, the courage, all the things that we've touched on today. And I want to put a plug out there that Chad does have a book out, like he mentioned, Blind Ambition, and so you can find that on Amazon, and encourage you to go look at that and hear more about Chad and his story. Again, we have just a couple minutes, but if anybody has any questions, you can throw those in the Q&A. I am just going to touch briefly on a few upcoming things we do have going on. We'll be hosting our next virtual event on Friday. That is Countdown to Kickoff for the Orange and White game, which will be on Saturday, but our virtual event will be on Friday at 12:30. And so if you have an interest in that, we would love to see you back for our next virtual event coming up later this week. So Chad, thank you again so much for your time today. We really do appreciate it. Thanks for being a Vol for Life. We are lucky to have alumni like yourself. So thank you again for your time, and we appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chad. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.